So hello and welcome to our pause of thought for this evening. I'm glad that you all managed to see the notice and make your way into the warm hall instead of the slightly cold church. So I'm very excited to introduce you to Ginny, Dr. Ginny Ross, who will be talking to us about dyslexia and learning difficulties as well. Fear not, the sheet of paper that you have been given is not actually a handout sheet or a sheet for you to do anything with. It's the other side for you to write notes on. And there's an exercise that Ginny will explain. So in case you don't know the format, we have about 40 minutes, is that right, Ginny? Of presentation, and then there's time of questions and answers, and then there's refreshments. Ginny very kindly put a slide up there with information so that you can look at it so that she can get right on to business with the presentation. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to her now. Thank you for sharing the mic.
I've got to work out which way around it goes. Pause for mic. Is that okay? Right. So, talking about dyslexia and other specific learning difficulties, recognising the problems and finding the solutions. And what I plan to do is think about specific learning difficulties and taking you through some of those. I'm going to give you an activity that shows you something to do with what it's like to be dyslexic and have an SpLD. Go through something about working memory and why there is no cure for dyslexia. And then in finding solutions, again, I have an activity, and this is where you need the paper and pencil. And then think about how we can find out how people think, how we can look at how children think. And I want to say something quite important about agency. And then I have some final thoughts, and my alarm will go off because I have no sense of time. So at the time when I need to stop, and go to my final thoughts, the alarm will go off, and then my very final slide is where you can find some resources. So the specific learning difficulties, there are 4 that get lumped together: dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, and dyscalculia. And the reason why they're all coming together is because the support that people give is very similar, but the root cause of them can be quite different. So with dyslexia, there's something about the way we handle words which goes wrong. And as I said on the first slide, I am dyslexic. So spelling, reading, writing, listening, and what's one I've missed out? One of them I've missed out. Every form of words can go wrong for somebody. For dyspraxia, it's your motor control. So that a person with fine motor control that's not working properly, all the time, their core is moving and shifting. So as they're learning something, then it's with a different framework, and it doesn't all collect down together. With attention ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, then you get impulsivity or attention control that is not maturing in the way that it is for everybody else. So they are focusing, but they're focusing very quickly on different things, and their attention is moving around all the time. So that, again, when they're learning, they're not consistently learning the same thing that the teacher or the parent expects them to be learning. And I've grouped those 3 together because the support that you give people with those different effects, syndromes, is very similar. And I've left dyscalculia slightly separated because somebody who is supporting a person with dyscalculia has to understand the way maths is taught now. So we're going back to the way you were taught in your childhood. Whereas for the support that is given for dyspraxia, dyslexia, and ADHD, you're supporting all sorts of different subjects, but with the same skills. So dyscalculia, there's two ways in which this is defined. Some people define it as arithmetic going wrong, in which case I would be dyscalculic because I can't do arithmetic. And other people define it as more fundamental, basic, and advanced maths understanding not developing properly in people's brains. So that's the basic core problem that then impacts on a whole load of other things. And as far as convincing other people that these syndromes exist and that they need to be taken seriously, I need to say that there's a lot of overlap. So that somebody who is dyslexic can share symptoms with people who are dyspraxic or have ADHD or even dyscalculia. So it's very difficult to say, well, this group of symptoms belongs to this particular specific learning difficulty. And then there are variations. There are some people for whom reading is just a nightmare, but there are some dyslexic people who have learnt to read from quite young, and reading is no problem, but other things to do with being dyslexic are problems in the same way. So we've got the overlap, we've got the variations, and these both happen in the problems and in the solutions. So it is quite difficult to convince other people what's going on. Now, I trained as a physicist, and it was only when I wanted to learn the classical guitar and had to put the right thing, play the right note at the right time, that I realised that I needed to do something about my dyslexia. By that time, I had been taught to meditate, so I could see what was happening in my brain. I had a very sympathetic guitar teacher, and between the pair of us, I was able to find out how my brain worked. And when I came to be then support tutor and work in the field of dyslexia, I knew I wouldn't believe what I was trying to say about being dyslexic if I couldn't see it for myself in my brain. So I thought, well, how am I going to show other people what it's like? And that's what made me do a whole range of activities that show people what dyslexia is like. And in the beginning, it was only dyslexia, but gradually people found that things didn't quite fit and we needed to have a whole range of different categories. So this is where I never believed in doing everything myself. So this is where the first activity comes in. And what I want you to do is sit comfortably and up, and probably put your pens and pencils down. And I am going to ask you to move your hands, your arms, and your legs. And to start off with, I'm going to use left and right. But after a little while, I'll also be using starboard, dexter, and red for right. And I'll be using port, sinister, and blue for left. So here we go. Put your left hand on your right knee. Cross your left ankle over the other one. Put your right hand on top of your head. Put your sinister arm out in front. Put your dexter foot to the starboard. Hold your sinister ear with your starboard hand. Put your port hand on the blue side of your waist. And put your dexter index finger on the starboard elbow. Yeah, you can't. Somebody's worked like that. So there were some giggles. Why were you giggling? I couldn't remember them. Because I hadn't written them up. Right. So how are you holding them together?
So can I remember port and starboard? But there was one thing you said, so I realised which was port and which was starboard. And then I could remember which.
Okay, so you were linking things together. Yeah? Why were people giggling? Can you say it? What?
Confusion.
Embarrassment?
Confusion.
Confusion? Okay. So this mimics what it's like for a dyslexic person for whom words are not being held together in the brain. You very quickly lose track of what's happening. For an ADHD person, they're concentrating for a while, but then they concentrate on something else and they forgot what they're doing. So even if they had started linking things together, it wouldn't still be there when they came back. For the motor control, you don't know where you are in your body sometimes. You don't know where your body is in the room. So you lose all of that. So gradually, as those sorts of things happen, and did it make sense that this is sort of what it's like? You can imagine that happening all the time, that you just don't pick up what's going on. So your concentration goes, your confidence goes, because you're not following and you're not keeping up with your peers. It takes much longer to process things. You start not to be able to organise anything because you don't know where it was, and there's no comprehension. So all of those sorts of things are regular problems to people who experience any of these syndromes. So that's the first activity. Okay, so now I want to talk about working memory capacity. And I'm using the model that Alan Bagley has developed. And he is looking at, he's a wonderful psychologist who's done lots of experiments on how we think and how memory works. And the understanding is that working memory has 4 chunks where information can be held. So I'm using an analogy with pigeonholes. And as the first lot of information comes into your brain, you have the first chunk of working memory used. And it's used until there is no link between that information and what's coming in next. And in that case, the second chunk of working memory gets used, the second pigeonhole starts fulfilling, until there is again no link between the information. And then the third one, and that's filled until again there is a break in the linkage, and then the fourth one gets filled, and that's as filled as much while there is still a linkage. But then what happens is that when the fifth lot comes in, it knocks out what was in the first chunk and starts using that all over again. So what was in that first chunk is no longer available to the person thinking. So if we look at why this has a huge effect, is that working with words, okay, so we've got the word working, and then if nobody's making any links, working memory goes into the second, and capacity would go into the third. So this is what would happen for a dyslexic person who is not making any links. So working memory capacity is, I could be saying, but it's all gone into four pigeonholes. So now the word limited knocks out working, and you've got limited memory capacity is, and the next word, limited to capacity is, that's not making any sense at all. So if your brain is not making any links between the words that come in, you're really struggling to understand what's going on because you haven't got enough information. So you can extend working memory. So here's our chunk. If you make links between the information that's coming in, so that it goes into that first pigeonhole, you've got instantly a lot more, but then you can put in some more that is still linked. And you can go on filling lots and lots of information, providing it is linked together. And it keeps going into a single chunk. And it's not until there is a break in the linkage that you start to need the second, the third and fourth pigeonholes. So by being able to link things together and knowing how to do that, you can increase the capacity of working memory tremendously. And that's something that is part of the solutions for dyslexia and SpLD, because you learn how to link stuff together. So, where did I go? Oh yeah, I know. what's coming next. We're now going to look at why there's no cure. So here I'm using an analogy between walking across a park and learning. And when there are no gates either side of the park, people will walk any which way. That's like a baby who is born. There are masses and masses of connections in the brain, and they can all be used. And the child, the baby, has to make sense of what's going on. So as it's making sense, that's like putting fences either side of the park and having some gates. Because then what happens is people walk between those gates. And you can see that with the way the grass is worn out. And what's happening in the baby's brain is that those neural networks that are used over and over again get reinforced, they get fed, they get a sheath put around them so that they become efficient. And the ones that are not used die off. So that gradually only the learning that you want is established. So that's like having two gates, one either side of the park, and people walking just directly between the two gates. That's the way learning is expected to happen. All the neural networks that you don't want used die away, and people just use the ones that are established learning. So what happens for the SpLD group, whichever way it's the cause that they're not learning the right way, those paths are used time and time again because the experience is not making sense in the child's brain. And so those neural networks get thoroughly established and used over again. Now, we can learn later on the right way to do things. I do know how to spell practice and practice when you have a C and when you have an S, but I have to think really hard about that, and at the drop of the hat, I'll use the wrong one, or randomly. So what is happening as far as somebody with a specific learning situation is concerned, later on in life, you learn the right way, but you don't get rid of the network that has matured as you have grown up. And so all the time, you know, I'm a fairly compensated dyslexic person. I've got a lot of strategies, but still, I'm vulnerable to my dyslexic network being activated at the drop of a hat. And that's the experience of all dyslexic SpLD people, that they don't know when that network is going to get activated. So it's really important to get the gates right for these learners, right from the word go, much more so than for what's called neurotypical people. Okay, so how do we go about finding solutions? And it's to do with finding out how people think. And how do you think? Do you know how you think? So that's my next activity. This is where you need pencil and paper. So I'm going to ask you to collect ideas about a shape or a colour. It doesn't matter what shape or what colour, but you need to check the connections. So we've got squares in the middle here. So you could think Trafalgar Square, that's connected to square. You could think about square domes. You could think about windows, they're often square. You could think about X squared if you're a mathematician, or a set square. And maybe squared paper. Oh, squared paper, right. We're changing the downstairs room. Let's get a room plan and put squared paper. We're going to need to choose furniture. When are the shops open? All of those thoughts are not connected to square, so they are not part of the activity. So as you do this activity, and I'll put the instructions up again, as you do this activity, you need to be thinking, is this the idea that's come into my head directly related to the shape or colour that I've put down or not? and you don't write down the ones that are not directly connected. Is that clear? Yeah? So here are the instructions, and I'm going to give you a minute and a half just to collect the ideas in your head and on the paper. Okay, that was a minute and a half. Now, would somebody, and if I've misspelled this, would somebody like to contribute what they've written down? Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I did purple. And I did Be Purple the band.
Oh. I think something's slipping. Yeah, okay. Yeah,
And I did Purple Heather.
yeah,
I did Purple at the end of the rainbow.
yeah.
I did the colour purple, the book.
Oh, colour purple. Oops. Yeah,
I did Purple Rain, the song.
yeah,
And I had Purple Horizon too. The horizon of purple sunset. That's where I got.
okay. Can somebody else? Yeah,
And yellow. Egg yolk. Sun. The sun, as in the sky.
yeah,
Yeah, I can't read. Oh, this lady's coat sleeves. Oh, yellow. The lady in front of you. Actually, no feet and shoes.
yeah,
And the fish on the notice board there on the left, amazing animals.
okay.
A giraffe.
Oh,
Or something anyway.
yeah,
And finally, my old girl tie. Which was yellow.
okay. Somebody else? Yes?
I went to blue.
Whoops, yeah,
I've got bluegrass,
yeah,
Peter as in Blue Peter,
yeah.
sky,
Oh,
cheese,
sky, right,
cheese,
yeah,
sea,
yeah,
fish,
yeah,
jumper, lights. Sorry, I'm going too fast.
no,
Door,
door,
mm-hmm.
okay,
Bluey the cartoon, and the emotion blue.
I'm handling now. Okay, did anybody do a shape? Yeah? Sally?
I did a circle.
Circle,
Yeah.
oops,
I did
Yeah.
a ring.
sorry,
A ring. Ring.
ring, yeah,
A circle dance. The concept of fullness, which I see as a circle. An orange. Fruit.
hang on. Fruit, yeah,
Support circle,
Yeah,
a sun,
yeah,
a ring of roses, as in the nursery rhyme, a porthole, a circle of friends, a loop, and finally, I can read it, an embroidery circle, you know, one of those ones.
Yeah. Embroidery ring.
Embroidery.
Okay. So, and then what we have to think about is what the connections are, why people thought of those things. So with the deep purple band and purple heather rainbow, what were the connections that you were seeing?
Well, with deep purple, it was the name, so it's the word.
Okay.
Whereas with the heather flower and the rainbow, it's colour itself.
Yeah.
And the colour purple again, it was the word purple that I was thinking of rather than the
Yeah.
actual colour of the book. Purple rain, again, I was thinking of the tube song. And the horizon, that again was colour thing. So it was primarily the word purple or the actual where the colour purple occurred.
Yeah. Okay. So, with the yellow, what's yellow?
Here, I can't think of an answer. Those are the words I gave that.
Were you seeing?
I suppose so, yes.
I mean, you know, just think about it. Did
I'm
you?
seeing the things I described?
You were seeing the things you described. Right. Okay. For instance, I have no internal vision, so I would, if I put those words down, I wouldn't be seeing them. And quite a few people, I mean, that's true of quite a few people, but we don't discuss that. Okay, so the blue. I've forgotten, that was you, yes.
Pictures.
Pictures. All of them?
Yep. So even the blue emotion is a sort of blue emoji.
Okay.
I'm thinking pictures. It is.
Okay. And sign of the circle?
Some of the things that I think of when I'm looking around for very long, the sun.
Sorry, you have to.
Some of them are things that look round, like a ring, the sun, an orange. So they actually look like circles.
And were you seeing them, or just knowing that they were?
I was seeing them.
Okay.
And the others were, some were words, so for example, support circle or friendship circle, those words. Or ring of roses. But forest, for example, is an abstract concept, but one that I think of as being certain.
Okay. So can you see that we're getting some pictures and some differences there? And so then what you have to think is if you're dealing with things and you're a seeing person, you've got seeing the right. That's telling me we've got to 6:35. I just didn't recognise the noise it made. Chose a different tune. So then you have to think, okay, this information that's coming to me, what sort of pictures can I put alongside it? And sometimes it can be completely unconnected, but just the way you've displayed it, if you're a pictorial person. If you're somebody who likes the abstract things, then what are the abstract connotations that go with with what I'm being told and the different ways in which you can attach abstract information to quite mundane stuff, if that's the way your brain works. So it's a question of finding out and doing this sort of exploration and playing with it and working out what makes it the links in your brain. And there's another thing that's going on. Yeah, so can't do time. Sometimes it's absolutely disastrous. Okay, so with a child, then you can watch how they do things. You can get them to explain to you a game or something that they're interested in, and listen to the language that they're using and start to understand what internal framework their minds like to use. What are they drawn to? And then if you play a game like Kim's game or Communism, how are they doing it? What links are they making? So we can explore further and use these insights. And in particular, we can use this sort of information to work out how people can link information together to make working memory much, much more efficient. And then when you do that, you can store information in long-term memory because it's making sense as it goes in. And then you can recall it much more effectively. And you can manipulate information that's coming in. So I'm somebody who likes doing things in pictures. I'll mind map and put stuff all over the place and put it into different ways of moving around to say that I can understand what's coming in. And there are a lot of people like that, but there are some who just can't do mind maps. So it's very much a question of finding what works for the individual and testing it. Is this way of doing something working for you or not? And then the people who are around you, recognizing we only have one brain and mind. And everything we do in life is coming through that brain and that mind, which has got, some of the compensations, but also has got that network of thoughts and different ways of doing things that can be activated. So each one of us needs to find our own way of learning and doing things, and we need to have comfort that the people around us are going to recognize and respect us for that. So agency is really important. My final thoughts. So working with students over 25, 30 years taught me that there are 4 really important ways in which information can be given. And it's well known that verbal and visual ways can be given. But there is quite a group of dyslexic, dyspraxic, ADHD people who need the kinesthetic way. And that's not used so much in education. And you don't actually have to do something, but just evoke physical memory. So even having a memory of being at a beach and thinking about it and using the memory of being there. There are also a group who need to know the framework, the rationale of what's going on before any information is given to them. Because if they don't have something already there in place, the incoming information has nothing to hook onto. And it goes in one ear and out the other, and it's lost very, very quick. So those are the 4 really important input methods. Confidence is something that is hugely important. If a person has been given confidence and valued as they grow up, they can cope with a lot of problems as they go. But if they're always challenged and made to feel that they're not doing what's required of them, then their confidence goes down, and even the things that they do well start to evaporate. So actually looking and noticing small things that go wrong can be really important, and getting hold of them before they go, before they get big. And then a lot of people who are struggling will say, well, you're good at doing something, you do it for me. And so my wonderful next door neighbour, who taught in primary school, he would kid his children and they'd say, you know, so, but you know how to cut this out. Please, you cut this shape out for me. It'll be much better. And he'd say, well, look, you know, if you're hungry and there's an apple on the table, is it any good if I eat the apple? What will that do for your hunger? Well, no, I've got to eat the apple, sir. You can't eat it. Well, learning's the same. Getting the skills is the same. So using sort of everyday things like that to encourage children, to encourage even adults. You know, my son says, Mum, you've got to learn. So yes, encouraging agency, really important. So resources, yeah, I'm now putting together some of these ideas that I've acquired from the students I've taught over the years and created a website, dyslexiastrategies.com, and I'm really happy with the first tranche of stuff that's gone up there. I've written a series of 4 books that have got a lot of information and knowledge, so that's a resource as well. And so just finally to say thank you for being here. We're on time.
No, you did press. Time for questions? Questions? Hello, yeah. Anybody got a question, Ginny?
And it's the questions I can't answer that she quickly.
Can you give us some examples of the kinesthetic learning that you might use in a classroom, for example?
Well, there's so I looked at let me remember now. There's a way of doing reading which has different roles in it. If you think in your email address, I'll go and look up where it comes from. Reciprocal. That's it. Yeah, that sort of thing is reciprocal reading, where you've got different roles and children play different sorts of place and role within doing the same thing. Yeah, that would be it. Yeah. So drama and enacting something that you're going through. So we're trying to teach maths shapes. This is this, but walking the shape. And again, so I've taught some of my students who, are you a teacher?
Yeah.
What age?
Well, sort of year 3 to year 8.
So that's 5 to, I've got 5 to 12. So at the 12-year-old, then if they're doing history, think about the people in the scene and people it, and imagine the places and the actions that are going on, and really get into, you know, the forces, what's it feel like to be riding, and have that sort of imagination. But eventually, the child and the people themselves need to know how to do that. And that was, so my students are like to universities, so they were all so a lot of very practical social workers, they found that if they thought about a particular client that they had encountered while they were hearing about the theory, they could relate it to that person and make sense of it, and imagine themselves there doing it. And somebody who was, this is slightly rigid, but it's kinesthetic as well, in that somebody who was having a great deal of problem writing a project, and she was a very people person, which hasn't come up, but it's another way of thinking. And so she had a frieze from a magazine of people on her desk, and she was writing her project for her patients, and she was thinking about her patients, and she was seeing a representation of them in front of her for doing that. So, but otherwise, have a board. They're very cheap.
£15. bargain.
Yeah. And the hard context. Yes. Yes.
Do you think that things?
No, it's all right. I've got a loud in my voice.
It's for whose?
Voice is better. A bit tangential, but I was thinking when you're talking about how your mind works, about how my mind works, but how it's changed. In other words, when I was young, I could quickly assimilate a poem just by hearing it. Now, when I'm trying to learn Welsh, I don't use any verbal memory. It has to be written. Now, can things change?
Things can change, but also different tasks sometimes require completely different strategies.
Okay.
So you were learning poetry, you already knew the words. So what learning
Read them, yes.
you read them.
Yes, but it was the sound of the words that were consolidated in memory.
Yeah.
So speeches and Shakespeare would just be absorbed. But now, no.
Well, but, I mean, if you go back and try and learn speeches of Shakespeare, do you still have the same way, or?
No, that's hard.
It's hard. Yeah. Memories do change.
Perhaps it's just brain rot.
I don't know about that.
I wouldn't like
Yes.
to is whether actually, visual learning, written learning changes.
I think it does. And I think different tasks require, you can be very competent with certain strategies and things, and then you get a task that doesn't suit for you those ways, and you have to go exploring again.
Right.
Yeah. There's one at the back and then you.
Question about dyslexia. A lot of children with dyslexia have difficulty writing. So would you recommend, for example, sticking with trying to write? Because sometimes for these children, it feels like they're hitting a wall, really, they can't do very well, or looking for alternative approaches. For example, somebody can scribe for them, or they can use a computer, something else. So for the brain, in terms of formation of the brain, what is better, do you think?
Well, so I haven't taught children at school. So what I'm going to relate is from a colleague who was a kinesthetic dyslexic, and she had a child that she could not teach to read. So she said, I'm going to master this. So she went and got herself trained in dyslexia. So then she got her schools. She found there were a lot of things she wanted to bring back into school. She could only do that by becoming head teacher. So she became head teacher of 2 state schools, not simultaneously, obviously. And she found that she could cater for all her pupils without any of them needing to be statemented, just by what she was putting in place. And what she was putting in place for writing was that, to start off with, the children were doing pictures and everything, and she got them to do borders to their pictures of sort of straight and long lines and little lines, curly-whirly, zigzags, all the sort of motion that you need for writing. So she was getting that thoroughly established before she ever let them anywhere near writing. And then she said, why do we go through the complication of printing and then getting children to do cursive writing? It would be much better to start with cursive writing. And she got almost all the letters to start on the line and move wherever they needed. So there was only one starting point for every single letter, and then she moved through. She also realised that the eyes are not really helpful, because what you need to do when you're writing is think of a word, it goes straight into your motor memory and you write it. And if you're all the time looking at what you're writing and assessing it and thinking, oh, this is not as good as it's supposed to be and everything, then you're always criticising yourself. So she She probably wouldn't be allowed to do it exactly this way now. She blindfolded her children to start off with, and she got big pieces of paper sellotaped down onto the desk, and the children were writing without being able to see what they were writing. So they would know what they were writing, but they were doing it straight to the motor memory. And she let them go really large to get the right motor memory established before she tried to get them to go much smaller. And she found by doing this process that, yeah, there was one child in one of her schools that hadn't cracked everything, but he'd got so many coping strategies, she said, he's going to be fine. I'm not worried about him. All the ones that would have had problems, she got sorted. So that was her process of getting the whole school sorted. And you had a question?
Yes, that's really interesting, thanks. So it's interesting that you're saying it's a specific, sorry, it was interesting that you gave the list of the 4 specific learning difficulties. What do you kind of think now? It's quite often lumped in as a neurodiverse or neurodivergent with other things. Are you kind of pro or anti that? Putting dyslexia and ADHD or having
So everything can overlap. I suppose I get pretty irritated when people make a sort of slight mistake, and it's, you know, something that they're okay with and say, oh, I'm doing it, you know, I'm having a dyslexic moment. And actually it's not a plague to their lives, so yeah. For me, I work with the individual. It's what's going on with that person as a support tutor. Neurodiverse as a word came in for Asperger's or autism, one of those spectrums.
Yeah, that's included.
Yeah, and I think it's actually quite muddling to try and have that spectrum seen as also similar to the specific learning difficulty spectrum, because you are dealing with quite different things. And yeah, so I think it's worth keeping them separate, but I know people are sort of trying to bring them all together.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Sally, did you have a question? There was a hand over there.
But yeah, we can do one more.
I was just going to ask if you've got any quick tips, Jenny, about getting things from short-term into long-term memory, because that sounds like a really crucial element in working with people with dyslexia.
So again, it's finding out which of these things is the way they understand and what really works for them, and letting them play. Then, so having established that, then there is the forgetting curve, where if you don't repeat something, if you've spent let's get this right. If you've spent an hour doing some work on a subject, if you then pause and just have a cup of tea, don't go for a run, but just have a cup of tea, you'll find when you come back that your brain has made more sense of what you've done. If you then take a good set of notes and you work out what the links are, then the next day, if you revise, bring back to memory, and write it down in some form, everything that you learnt the first day, you're reinforcing in long-term memory what you did the day before. And you look at what's been missed out and you think, okay, how can I link that into the rest of the material? And you do that. And then a week later and a month later and 6 months later, and that is supposed to get it into long-term memory. So that's the received wisdom. And by doing that repeated rehearsal, you're saving yourself an awful lot of time, because then when you come to use that information a lot later, it will come back to you. Again, it's a question of playing and experimenting and working out what's the right thing for you. And so I've just learned all the books of the Old Testament, and had to put them together in the right way. And there was one book that never quite settled down, and it's because I'd analysed them wrong. I'm somebody who needs to know the framework, and I'd analysed it wrong, so I had to reanalyse it, and then that's okay. So there's 3 groups of 5, there's 3 groups of 3, and there's a whole load of 12. But yeah, so hopefully that.
So I think we've got space for one more. Anyone sat there thinking they'd like to ask a question? This is your moment. Well, thank you, Ginny. You had, this was like a 2-day programme normally, wasn't it? But you condensed into 40 minutes for us. So let's just give a huge round of applause. Thank you.